In the previous video we saw that the military-industrial complex evolved during the Second World War as an alliance between weapon manufacturers and the military, and that it quickly expanded to include many different kinds of corporations and government departments. In this video we will see how the military-industrial complex creates profits for its corporations by increasing US influence or dominance across the world. First, we will quickly have a look at how US power expanded after the Second World War, resulting in what some call the US Empire, and what government planners call the Grand Area. Then we will examine how the military-industrial complex creates profits for big business. The focus of the discussion will be the Middle East, the Iraq War, and something what is called petrodollar recycling. The next two videos will look into how the military-industrial complex also exploits the US population. Now, let's see how the United States expanded its power after the Second World War. The United States emerged from the Second World War as a superpower, leaving every other rival far behind. The war proved to be very beneficial to the United States economy. Meanwhile, every other industrialized nation was seriously damaged or destroyed. Western Europe, Japan, Russia, they were all in ruin. Only the United States had escaped destruction and emerged from the war stronger than ever. This position of unprecedented economic and military power did not come as a surprise. Already during the war, detailed plans were designed by the US government to create a US-dominated world system. The main architects came from the Council of Foreign Relations and the State Department. The Council of Foreign Relations represents the leading sectors of big business. Business leaders from the Council, supported by academic experts, regularly met with government officials from the State Department to plan and design the post-war world. These planners created a concept of what they called the Grand Area, which is explained really well in this book, Imperial Brain Trust. The Grand Area would be a region of the world in which the United States were to hold unquestioned power. In the first years of World War II, the Grand Area was supposed to consist of the Western Hemisphere, which is North and South America, the Pacific area including much of East Asia, and the Middle East. By then US planners thought Germany would win the war, leaving a German bloc outside of US control in much of Western Europe. When it became clear Germany was losing, the Grand Area was expanded to include Western Europe as well. Regions within the Grand Area were all given a function. Western Europe would be reconstructed with Germany as its industrial center. In Asia, Japan was to be the industrial workshop. They, together with the United States, were going to be the industrial cores. The main function of the rest of Asia, Africa, the Middle East and Latin America was to provide raw materials and foodstuffs, and to be markets for the industrialized nations. Asia was seen as a cheap source of vital raw materials, an economic and strategic prize. The resources of Latin America were described by the influential planner George Kennan as ours, meaning although these resources were located outside of the United States, they did in fact belong to the US. The oil reserves of the Middle East were not only regarded as one of the greatest material prizes in world history, but control over Middle Eastern oil was also seen as a stupendous source of strategic power. The United States would never formally conquer and occupy large regions within their Grand Area. The White House does want obedient governments in place, and it is the task of the military-industrial complex to see to it that no government in the Grand Area goes against US power, or in the case a government does challenge the United States, it is quickly overthrown. A system of more than 800 military bases all over the world, as explained in this book, Base Nation, is a major way how the United States maintains control over its Grand Area. But why this desire to control? Well, politicians sure like to build an empire. But with control also comes opportunities for profits, and the more control one has, the greater these profits will be. The Middle East has been one of the main focus points of US planning from the start. The reason is simple: the region holds the energy reserves of the world. Control over this not only means power, it also means money. Because the military-industrial complex is so strongly associated with war, we will first have a look at the Iraq War and how this event enabled the military-industrial complex to generate big profits for its corporations. This video will end with a discussion on the petrodollar, showing how the military-industrial complex can also create enormous profits during peacetime. After the US military had defeated the Iraqi army after its invasion in 2003, the military-industrial complex immediately followed. Although the war was in many aspects a failure, it was surely a profitable event for some, and not by coincidence. One obvious example are the energy corporations. During the 1970s, Iraq had taken control over its oil, meaning Western oil corporations could no longer operate in the production process. However, the war brought them back. After the invasion, a collaborating Iraqi cabinet passed laws that opened up the door for foreign investments, especially American investments, as stated in a Declaration of Principles for Friendship and Cooperation, signed by George Bush in 2007. In January 2008, Bush left little doubt about the intentions of the war when he made clear he would use his presidential powers to ensure funding for the permanent stationing of United States armed forces in Iraq, in order to exercise United States control of the oil resources of Iraq. The real war aims could not have been stated more clearly. Several months later, in the summer of 2008, Western oil corporations, including Exxon, got contracts to start producing oil in Iraq, and soon were operating in the country's largest oil field, a rare prize according to the New York Times. US service companies such as Halliburton also won billion-dollar contracts. But there was much more going on than just energy corporations. The war was profitable to others as well. US arms manufacturers like Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Raytheon and Boeing earned billions of dollars to produce the weapons that destroyed Iraq. And after the war, US construction firms like Bechtel, Parsons and KBR were brought in to reconstruct Iraq's infrastructure that was destroyed, and they made billions too. Other beneficiaries ranged from private security firms all the way to the big financial institutions like Citibank and JP Morgan, who thanks to changes the United States made to the Iraqi economy, finally got access to the country's financial system. This ability of the military-industrial complex to generate profits is not limited to war, but also extends to peacetime. The Middle East, its oil and the petrodollar are a perfect example. If it would be possible to look down from outer space and see the flow of goods and money to and from the Middle East, one would see oil flowing out of the Middle East to the rest of the world, while money in dollars, the petrodollar, flows from the rest of the world to the Middle East. Interestingly, not all of this money goes to the governments in the Middle East. The military-industrial complex also gets a large share. Because US military power is so dominant in the Middle East, the military-industrial complex can create an environment that allows it to get a large part of this oil money. It has helped create several mechanisms to accomplish this goal. First, the military-industrial complex convinced many Arab leaders to invest their profits from oil in the United States or deposit their money on US banks. In this way, the dollars that flowed into the Middle East to pay for oil find their way into the US economy. US banks can then use this money to make loans and investments, which is a source of profits for these financial institutions. Another way how oil money can flow back to the West is through weapons sales. Most regimes in the Middle East are dictatorships, and dictators have a tendency to love weapons. One obvious reason is the need for weapons to keep their populations under control. Arms sales from the United States to the Middle East causes weapons to flow into the Middle East, and petrodollars, sometimes called weapon dollars, to flow out to the United States weapon manufacturers. This also provides a boost for the high-tech industry, because the production of modern weapon systems and the high-tech industry are interconnected. Yet another way to recycle petrodollars, meaning getting the money back to the United States, is through special deals, like one made in the 1970s with Saudi Arabia. With this deal, the Saudi leadership would use its oil money to buy US Treasury securities, meaning they would buy a portion of the US debt, and by doing so finance US government spending. Also, the interest, the money Saudi Arabia earned from buying these securities, would be used to pay leading US construction firms to begin building modern infrastructure in Saudi Arabia. One perfect example is the Jubal Industrial City project, one of Bechtel's prime achievements. It is the largest civil engineering project in the world. An entire modern city was built, including ports, industrial parks, highways, residential and educational facilities, medical centers, roads, bridges. Saudi Arabia will thus be modernized by US construction and engineering firms, while making handsome profits in the process. In return, the United States government promised to protect, if necessary militarily, the ruling Saudi family, making sure their dictatorship would endure. The Saudis also had to promise to keep the oil price within a certain range, not too low because that would harm the profits of the oil industry, and not too high because that would harm other sectors in the economy, like industry and transport. Again, as with the war in Iraq, the military-industrial complex helps create profits for big corporations. Military power and corporate profits have always been related. The military complex is thus not new, but it has simply taken this relationship to new heights. Be sure to check out the next two videos. They will be discussing the ways how the military-industrial complex creates corporate profits by exploiting not populations abroad, but the US population at home.